Okay, so welcome back to part 2 of rendering animations. So far we just added some textures on here, and I didn't go too crazy with it because our main point of this tutorial is more about how to animate and how to set up renders in the render queue. So you can see here I have the animation playing. Now some of you might have had some issues with playback, either playing too fast or not at the right rate, right? So if you click on this little guy here, you'll see that you have a playback here. So here I have it set to 30 frames a second, and I make sure I have this set to also 30 frames per second times 1 on the bottom here for playback. So there's two things. There's the time slider, which is the time code that the time slider is going to use, which is 30 frames per second, and then you have the playback speed, which is also, you want to make sure that it's playing back at 30 frames per second. So they're two different things, and you might have so if you had play every frame here, you definitely want to change that because it's not going to try to accurately play the frames. It may have to, depending on your hardware, it might either play way too fast on every 2 frame or maybe play slow. So it depends on how powerful your graphics card is. But if you put this on at least 30 frames per second times 1, at least you'll get, it'll drop frames if it has to, or it'll play every frame if it is powerful enough to play it. So we'll just leave that on there. And so now so we already can see it in the timeline, but because the frame rate is kind of inaccurate, like I said, if your card's not powerful enough, it might have to drop frames to play it accurately. And or if it's too, if it's powerful enough, sure, it'll play it fast enough. But we're not really going through a process of creating a movie yet, right? So right now I can't do anything with this Maya animation, right? So I want to be able to at least capture what's on the screen and play it back and edit it and bring it into Premiere or After Effects or whatever you want, right? So let's just go ahead and do this is not the final rendering process, but what we want to do is go ahead and do a playblast. So if I go into the window option here and I say window and I open the playblast window here, you're going to want to turn these options on. Now you'll notice I have, so from window means whatever window I'm in here, and we want to do the view. If you want to use the movie format here, so it's going to be, you're going to want it from window here. You can do it from render settings too if you want an accurate frame of this. So in other words, right now I'm just going to do it from the window. It's not going to be, it's going to, since you're constantly resizing, the Maya windows, it might not really be the accurate frame that you want to do. But let's try this method first. And so I want to make sure also that I have this on H.264 rather than JPEG. So make sure you have H.264 and go ahead and play blast. You might have different options here, obviously, if you're on the Windows machine, but you should be able to do it H.264. And let's just go ahead and say play blast. Okay, so there's our play blast. And so you'll notice it sort of looks like a widescreen format, but maybe it's not set up properly, right? Because again, when you take Maya, every time you resize this, right? Every time you resize Maya, you're getting a different frame size here. So if you want an accurate frame size, you're going to want to go into make sure your render settings are all set up to accommodate a good frame size, or one that's a DV format or something. So let's go into rendering here. So I'm going to change the module to rendering, and I'm going to go to my render settings. And for now, let's just give this a name. So I'm just going to call this bouncing ball. Okay. So I'm just going to give it a name in the file output. And if you go down here, you'll see file size. So I don't really like, I don't know why it defaults to this odd HD 540. This is a really old format. Pretty much everything now is going to be 1080 or higher. So most TVs too, now we have 2K resolution. But for the purpose of this, we're just going to use 1080 so that we don't have a really long dragging render time. So the 1080 that you want to use is HD 1080 here. You don't want to use a different one than that. So let's just go to 1080, right, and close.